Niccolò Machiavelli is often remembered as history's original villain, and not without reason. He tore through the moral framework of his time, dismissing traditional ethics, mocking Christianity, and building an entire political system not on goodness, but on ruthlessness and deceit. But the caricature of Machiavelli, the shadowy manipulator, the cold strategist, is only part of the truth. If you look beyond the infamous reputation and into the ideas he actually wrote, you'll uncover disturbing but undeniably relevant insights into the nature of leadership, human behavior, and power itself. To understand those insights, you first need to understand the man behind them and the chaotic world that shaped his thinking. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469. Though his family was noble, they were not particularly wealthy. His father, Bernardo, was an out-of-work lawyer with connections but little influence. A religious skeptic by the standards of his era, Bernardo likely passed this disposition to his son. Machiavelli's mother, in contrast, was devout. She spent her time writing religious hymns and poetry. This early exposure to both religious devotion and intellectual doubt would subtly shape Machiavelli's later thinking. At the time, Florence was a republic, in theory. In practice, power rotated chaotically through a group called the Priori, a council of 8 elected every 2 months. They were selected via a lottery from the names of Florence's elite, supposedly to keep power evenly distributed. But in reality, the Medici family had already corrupted the process, stacking the selection pool with loyalists. The result? A republic that functioned more like a disguised dictatorship. This wasn't unusual in Italy. The peninsula was a patchwork of rival states, many of them ruled by warlords, mercenary captains, and dynastic families who changed allegiance as quickly as the winds. Treachery was common, corruption was expected, and brutality was visible, even for a child. When Machiavelli was 9, conspirators against the Medici were hanged upside down from Florence's main government building and left to rot for weeks. That kind of spectacle leaves a mark. We know little about Machiavelli's early years, but he received a solid education. In 1494, when the Medici were briefly overthrown, the Republic returned to power and Machiavelli's career began. Hina was appointed to a government post and rose quickly. By 28, he was the second chancellor and secretary of the Ten of War, 2 powerful roles that gave him oversight of Florence's foreign affairs and military planning. How did he earn such lofty positions at such a young age? No one really knows. There's no record of prior qualifications, but for over a decade, Machiavelli served as Florence's top diplomat. While his missions didn't lead to lasting triumphs, Florence was too weak at the time to dictate regional politics. He held his own among Europe's power players. Then, in 1512, Florence fell. The Medici returned to power. Suspected of conspiracy, Machiavelli was imprisoned, tortured, and exiled. It was during this period of exile that he wrote The Prince, the infamous treatise that would make his name immortal and synonymous with manipulation. The Prince is not a guide for living a good life. It's a survival manual for rulers, a cold, unsentimental assessment of what it takes to obtain and hold power. Machiavelli didn't merely separate ethics from politics, he severed them entirely. Before Machiavelli, the prevailing belief was that a leader's greatness came from moral character. The ideal ruler was virtuous, kind, and just. Machiavelli dismissed this as fantasy. He argued that success in leadership comes from achieving stability, not behaving virtuously. A prince should aim to be feared rather than loved, not because fear is noble, but because it's reliable. People, Machiavelli argued, are fickle. They lie, they betray, they change loyalties. Fear, unlike love, doesn't waver. Fear keeps people in line. But there's a line, he warned. A ruler should never be hated. Hatred leads to conspiracy. It leads to assassins. Violence, if necessary, should be swift and discreet. Compassion is fine when it serves a purpose, but cruelty is a tool, one that must be used with precision. This wasn't cynicism for its own sake. It was a brutally honest attempt to understand how power actually functions in the real world. And in that world, Machiavelli saw that goodness alone wouldn't protect you. You needed cunning, courage, and a willingness to act like a beast when the time called for it. Perhaps the most vivid example in The Prince is Cesare Borgia, the ruthless son of Pope Alexander VI. With papal backing, Borgia carved out a state. In central Italy, in one city he sent his right-hand man, Ramiro de Lorqua, to restore order. Lorqua unleashed a reign of terror, executions, property seizures, public mutilations. When Borgia returned and saw that the people hated Lorqua, and by extension him, he acted decisively. He had Lorqua executed, cut in half, and displayed in the town square. Then he told the citizens that Lorqua had acted without his approval, painting himself as their savior from a monster he had, in truth, unleashed. It was deceitful, it was brutal, and to Machiavelli it was brilliant. For Machiavelli, Cesare Borgia wasn't just an effective ruler, he was a case study. A leader, he argued, must be willing to betray even his closest allies if it secures the loyalty or obedience of the masses. The lesson, appear moral, but act according to necessity. This is the core of Machiavellian philosophy, the rejection of idealism. He believed that a ruler doesn't have the luxury of acting only on compassion or honesty. The world is not built for that. Instead, the world is a battlefield, and on that field, virtue is only useful if it serves victory. It's better to be feared than loved, he said, because fear is within your control. You can inspire it, maintain it, shape it. Love, on the other hand, is fleeting, subjective, unreliable. And it cannot be commanded. Yet even fear, he noted, has its limits. It must never turn into hatred. Hatred breeds revenge. So Machiavelli outlines a brutal formula. Be feared, but do not be hated. Use cruelty swiftly and only when necessary. Appear loyal even if you betray. Smile even when you strike. It's cold, it's calculated. But to Machiavelli, it was simply the way the world worked. And denying that, he warned, was a recipe for failure. Another core tenet of The Prince is the use of deception. Machiavelli doesn't just tolerate dishonesty, he champions it as a political weapon. Yes, he admits, honesty is admirable, but admirable doesn't always mean useful. And in politics, usefulness is everything. He asks, why should a leader tell the truth when everyone else lies? Why fight with a sword when your enemies use poison? If your rivals deceive and manipulate, why tie your own hands with ethics? According to Machiavelli, truth has no inherent value in politics unless it serves power. A ruler should lie if it brings stability. He should betray if it prevents rebellion. And above all, he should cultivate an image of virtue, even if it's a complete illusion. Because here's the trick, people judge leaders by appearances, not reality. Most citizens, Machiavelli argued, will never see what happens behind palace doors. They judge based on speeches, parades, victories. They remember what they are told, not what actually occurs. And so he advises, craft the image of virtue, even if your actions contradict it. Pretend to be compassionate, pretend to be just, pretend to be pious. But when survival demands cruelty or betrayal, act swiftly and hide the mess. People care more about results than principles, Machiavelli insists. They remember whether you kept them safe, not whether you told the truth doing it. In a world of masks, he argues, the most successful leaders are not the most moral, but the best actors. It's no surprise that modern politics still echoes this idea. Today's leaders, like Machiavelli's princes, walk a fine line between appearing ethical and being effective. The persona often matters more than the reality. One of Machiavelli's most profound philosophical contributions is his dichotomy of Virtù and Fortuna. These two forces define the tension between personal agency and the chaos of the world. Virtù, a term often mistranslated as virtue, has nothing to do with moral goodness. Instead, it refers to strength, skill, bravery, and the force of character needed to impose one's will. It's whatever trait allows someone to shape destiny: cunning, adaptability, courage, even brutality. Fortuna, by contrast, is fate, luck, the unpredictable storms of life. Machiavelli compares it to a river, capable of flooding and destroying cities. But with preparation and engineering, you can build dams and channels to redirect the flood. That's what Virtù does. It prepares you for the chaos of Fortuna. This philosophical pairing gives Machiavelli's work lasting relevance. He tells us, fortune controls half of what we do, but the other half is ours to command, and we must be ready to adapt when fortune shifts. You can succeed one day using method A, but fail the next using the same method. Why? Because fortune changed, and so must you. Machiavelli believed that beneath the thin layer of civilization, humans are beasts. We are selfish, inconsistent, emotional, and dangerous. To lead humans, therefore, one must become a beast as well, but a specific kind. In one of the prince's most famous passages, he writes that a ruler must learn how to be both the lion and the fox. The lion is strength. He intimidates, he strikes fear. But the lion is easily trapped. The fox is cunning. He avoids snares and uses cleverness to survive. But the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. A great leader must be both, strong enough to conquer and clever enough to avoid ruin. Bravery without strategy is reckless. Deception without power is futile. Only in balance do they form true control. This beast metaphor, chilling as it is, reflects Machiavelli's deeper view of humanity. We are animals who pretend to be ethical, and in a world where traps are everywhere, pretending isn't enough. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Machiavelli is this: there is a vast gap between how the world ought to be and how the world actually is. And if you live according to how it ought to be, you will be destroyed by those who live according to how it is. Idealism is admirable, but in Machiavelli's world, it's also dangerous. It blinds you to the risks and underestimates the capacity for betrayal. This belief is the spine of all his work. You must deal with the world as it exists, not as you wish it were. To do otherwise, he warns, is political suicide. And in this way, Machiavelli becomes not just a political philosopher, but a dark realist. He does not encourage cruelty for its own sake. He encourages preparation, strength, awareness, survival. Ironically, the man who wrote The Prince, a guide to surviving and thriving in political life, failed to live by his own advice. Machiavelli wrote the book as a gift to Lorenzo de' Medici, hoping it would earn him political favor. He even dedicated the work to Lorenzo, attempting to prove his usefulness despite being previously imprisoned and tortured by the Medici regime. It was a desperate play for relevance. A job application disguised as a philosophical treatise, and it didn't work. There's no record that Lorenzo ever read The Prince. Machiavelli never regained political office. Instead, his boldest attempt to re-enter politics may have backfired. After all, who would trust someone who openly advocates for lies, betrayal, and manipulation? What ruler would welcome such a man into their inner circle? Machiavelli's work, though intellectually brilliant, becomes self-defeating when applied. To his own life, he wrote convincingly about gaining trust through deceit, then asked for trust as the author of deceit. A master of duplicity asking to be believed. In many ways, The Prince is Machiavelli's confession and his undoing. Following the failure of the prince to restore his political standing, Machiavelli returned to private life. He spent his time in the countryside, writing comedic plays and letters, often full of wit and romantic entanglements. Though brilliant, his life turned inward. He achieved some fame for his literary works, but never held significant political power again. There's no evidence that Machiavelli ever practiced what he preached. He never ruled, never led a revolution, never commanded an army. And unlike his idol Cesare Borgia, he never had the opportunity to test his ideas at scale. This creates a peculiar paradox. The man who defined political realism may never have had the power to act on it. Some argue that this was Machiavelli's final trick, that he lived by his principles in secret, his greatest manipulations lost to time. But history does not confirm this. If anything, Machiavelli lived out his days as a disillusioned observer, watching the world from the sidelines, yet his influence only grew after his death. The Prince was not published until 5 years after Machiavelli died in 1527. When it was, it quickly earned condemnation. An English cardinal called it the work of Satan's finger. Pope Paul IV banned the book entirely. In France, the Medici legacy took a new shape. Catherine de' Medici, daughter of Lorenzo, became queen mother to a weak French king. She allegedly read Machiavelli obsessively, and under her influence France saw one of its most brutal moments, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, where thousands of Protestants were slaughtered in a single night. Though historians debate her motivations, one of the survivors, Innocent Gentile, published a scathing book describing Machiavelli as the mastermind of villainy. He portrayed Machiavellian thought as the root of evil, a handbook for tyranny disguised as philosophy. His interpretation was widely accepted. Gentile's book was translated into Latin and English long before the Prince itself ever reached an English audience. And so, the myth of Machiavelli, the villainous, heartless schemer, spread across Europe. Machiavelli had become more than a writer. He became a symbol. The term Machiavellian now conjures images of cold-hearted villains, puppet masters, and ruthless leaders. In literature, it shaped characters like Shakespeare's Iago and Richard III. In politics, it became shorthand for leaders who wielded deception as easily as diplomacy. Yet much of this legacy is based on a distorted version of Machiavelli's work. The Prince was meant to describe political survival, not to encourage evil. Machiavelli didn't say cruelty was good, only that it was sometimes necessary. He didn't celebrate lying, he simply acknowledged it as a useful common weapon. The oversimplification of his ideas, especially by those who never read him, turned a complex philosopher into a cartoonish villain. But those who study the full body of Machiavelli's work, including the discourses, see a more nuanced thinker, one who believed in republican governance, one who feared tyranny as much as he understood its mechanics. A man who understood human nature and tried to warn others what leadership truly demands. Centuries later, Machiavelli's philosophy still echoes in political halls around the world. His central premise, that morality and effective leadership, often conflict, remains disturbingly relevant. Politicians today must appear virtuous while making ruthless decisions behind closed doors. Public faces and private strategies remain distinct, and many of the tools Machiavelli described, fear, spectacle, narrative control, are still in use. Whether you view him as a genius or a moral hazard, Machiavelli was right about one thing: politics is a performance, and those who fail to understand the stage often lose the game. In this sense, he didn't create the modern political machine. He diagnosed it. He peeled back the curtain and showed us what power really looks like when stripped of illusion. For all his insight into power and deception, Machiavelli did not celebrate cruelty. He acknowledged it, he explained it, but he never reveled in it. His works are not love letters to tyranny, they're cautionary guides for those brave enough to lead in a brutal world. That distinction matters. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for the destruction of virtue. Rather, he was urging leaders not to be destroyed by it. His message was simple, if unsettling. Goodness is admirable, but insufficient. And anyone who tries to rule solely through goodness will be at the mercy of those who do not. There's a strange honesty in that. Machiavelli never sugar-coated the world. He believed it was full of liars, traitors, cowards, and opportunists. So he asked, "How can you lead such people effectively?" His answer was harsh but practical. Learn to fight like the beast beneath your skin. Be the lion when strength is needed. Be the fox when cunning is your only weapon. Be ethical when possible, but never naive. It's not the morality of a saint. It's the logic of a survivor. Machiavelli's worldview is ultimately shaped by the tension between two forces, Virtù and Fortuna. We cannot control everything. Disasters happen, enemies rise, friends betray. But through Virtù, that inner strength, courage, and cunning, we can shape our responses. We can't stop the flood, but we can build the dam. This is more than political theory. It's a philosophy for life. Machiavelli tells us that preparation and adaptability are our greatest defenses against chaos. And while luck may shape half of our outcomes, we are still responsible for the other half. In a way, it's empowering. It tells us, no, you're not helpless. Even in a broken world, you can fight. You can survive. You can lead. But only if you stop pretending that the world is fair. Perhaps the most psychologically astute element of Machiavelli's philosophy is his view of human nature. Long before Freud explored the subconscious or Jung named the shadow, Machiavelli warned of the beast within us. He believed that every person carries impulses, ambition, desire, rage, that conflict with social norms. We hide them. We suppress them. But they never disappear. For Machiavelli, these inner forces aren't meant to be denied entirely. They must be understood, harnessed, directed toward purpose. Don't be ruled by your inner beast, he said, but don't ignore it either. Learn from it. Use its strength. Lead with your mind, but don't forget the animal instincts that kept your ancestors alive. It's a brutally honest assessment of who we are, one that still resonates in a world full of pretense. Ultimately, Machiavelli's philosophy boils down to one chilling truth. Those who live according to how the world should be are destroyed by those who live according to how the world is. This insight is perhaps his most powerful and most painful. Many people live by principles. They believe in fairness, kindness, and justice, and these values matter. But Machiavelli warns that without the strength to defend those values, they will be trampled by ambition, betrayal, and greed. That doesn't mean we should abandon virtue. It means we must anchor virtue in strategy. Stand for good, yes, but be prepared for evil. Live with integrity, but don't be blind to danger. And if you must fight, fight to win. It's a philosophy of resistance, not surrender. But it requires eyes wide open. Machiavelli died in 1527, politically irrelevant and personally unfulfilled. He never ruled. He never achieved the greatness he so clearly understood, and yet his name lives on. Few political philosophers have left such a permanent mark. His words have inspired dictators and reformers, cynics and strategists. His ideas have been distorted and demonized, misunderstood and mythologized. But at their core, Machiavelli's writings are not instructions for cruelty. They are reflections on survival, a mirror held up to the darkest parts of power with just enough light to show a way through. So what do we make of Machiavelli? He's dangerous, but not because he's wrong. He's dangerous because he's right more often than we'd like to admit. He tells truths we don't want to hear about human nature, politics, and ourselves. He believed that appearances matter more than intentions, that power is often born from deception, that fear lasts longer than love, that chaos is inevitable but not unbeatable. And while I may not want to live in Machiavelli's world, I cannot deny that I already do. Even now, Centuries later, the stage is still set with illusions. Leaders still wear masks, and power still demands sacrifices. But perhaps the most dangerous thing we can do is pretend that Machiavelli was evil and ignore the uncomfortable wisdom he left behind. Because while Machiavelli may never have worn a crown, he understood the cost of wearing one better than anyone who ever did.